On today's episode, I'm joined by a New York Times best-selling historian who is out with her brand new book, Off With Her Head. She traces back 3,000 years of our history to explain why society has conditioned women into subordination and how big tech algorithms perpetuate the gender culture wars. You're gonna want to hold on to your seats for this one, guys. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Eleanor Herman, and this is Uncovering the Truth. Eleanor, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you, Dash.
Absolutely. Let's just get right into it. You know, your book, Off With Her Head, essentially, it woke me up because where I stand here, we're in a culture war. Currently, I believe the main culture war here in America is this battle of gender, of man versus woman, of should women be CEOs? Should women hold political power? You know, and when your book, I read it, I'm like, the plight of women has been going on for thousands of years. So I guess it seems to me, is there some inherent fear or, you know, inherent misogyny in all of us that we need to undo through society? Or is this something that we can overcome one day? Because I mean, seriously, when does the plight end?
Well, my question was, when and how did it begin? You know, I am a historian, and I've studied ancient history. And I think that the misogyny goes back into the earliest parts of human existence. It might be biological, genetic. It's going to be really tough to undo. But I think at this point, we're in a position in our society to try to undo it. And part of it is just realizing how misogynistic our civilization is, and how misogynistic all of us are. You know, I've always considered myself to be a feminist, and in doing the work for this book, I realized that I too, even I, have misogynistic tendencies. Really? Like when I see a woman come on TV, I start judging her appearance, like, she needs more lipstick, and that hair is wrong. You know, I don't do that for men. So yes, it's with us. It doesn't mean we're bad people. We're just raised in a particular time and place and culture, and we just inhale this stuff. It's there.
And so, yeah, right. The fact that you have even admitted that there are some things inside of us that, right, like it's a bad impulse where I'm like, hey, don't judge them like that. Don't. It's there's something inside of us that I don't understand, and it makes me mad at saying, like, we're not perfect, and there is a part of us that does always seek to dominate one another. And yeah, how that's been going on though since for thousands of years?
Well, it has been, and my book traces the stories of many powerful women, influential women who have, you know, in centuries past, found themselves in positions of power. They were the queen or the queen mother or the queen consort, and there's a pattern of vilification against these women throughout time. You know, I trace it back 3,500 years in my book. Cleopatra certainly suffered the brunt of the Roman patriarchy. They made her a slut. They blamed her for everything that Mark Antony did wrong. There's a theme of blame the woman throughout this. Marie Antoinette apparently caused the French Revolution with her fashion excess, even though she had no political power. And the misogyny against women in power is even worse in the past century, when women were actually vying for power. They didn't marry it, they didn't inherit it. They went out there and threw their hat in the ring to run for public office. And the hatred is just so deep and so vicious. And now with social media, someone can post some horribly hateful comment, and it wings its way around the world in seconds. So it's even worse now in some ways.
I would agree with you. And you know what, I actually love that you brought up, because you were a historian, and yet you brought up, this is towards the end of your book, but you focus on how algorithms today are putting forth these, you know, extremist ideas, or rather these anti-feminist ideas, because a majority of users on the internet are young men, which which sort of brings me to my next point here. Influencers are now dictating how we think and feel. And there is a very prominent influencer named Jordan Peterson, who has, again, if you don't know him, I just really quickly, he is a guy who he declares himself a postmodernist, and his argument is that women are, quote, more biologically agreeable than men, and therefore it is not in their best interests to become CEOs, and the gender pay gap is a natural hierarchy. And so though this guy has permeated the minds of millions of young men, and I believe he's preying on their fears, their economic fears, and this is a social media problem. But how do you combat these sorts of voices, these doctors and psychologists who just get a giant platform and begin to espouse anti-feminist rhetoric?
Well, there are various ways, and this is just a new method of putting women back in their place. This is what it's Yep. all about. Women too have the same option to get their own platforms. And there are many things that can be done today to combat it. One is, shame the shamers. In the Prime Minister of Australia from 2010 to 2013 was a woman named Julia Gillard, and she suffered the worst misogyny I've ever seen. I mean, they criticized the size of her butt, the size of her earlobes, her voice. I mean, they just everything she ever wore, which they never would have done. And this is mainstream press, not just social media. They never would have done that to her male colleagues. They never did. And she and Hillary Clinton, like her in the 2016 election, thought, I'm not going to dignify this with a response. I'm going to just politely ignore it. And that was wrong. Both women said later that they realized that was a mistake. They need to get out there and say, this is absolutely unacceptable. This person is a complete sexist and a fool, and fight back. That's one of the more important things that I think women can do. There are also media guides, at least for the mainstream media, that were helpful somewhat in the 2020 election. Different women's political organizations sent them around to the press and asked them before they publish anything, are you criticizing a woman for her ambition? Something, by the way, men are praised for, right? Are you asking who's going to take care of the children? Like, as if, there are no husbands, there are no nannies, like only the children are going to starve if she's in politics. Are you talking about her weight loss or the shrillness of her voice? There are many excellent media guides that have gone out, and I think they have started to change the conversation, at least in the mainstream media.
Well, whoever controls the media controls the mind, right? And but what you're saying there about women having to stay at home, because I grew up with both of my parents at home, so I never truly understood this. It's like the woman's job. It's not. It's both parents are responsible for their child. So, but today we see this argument being placed forth that the nuclear family is being dissolved by and large women having career ambitions. So that there's a sort of, they're trying to justify women's subordination. But to your point about Hillary Clinton, it seems to me that this was not even just men simply saying we don't want her, but in fact, there was a lot of women who voted against her, when in my mind, I'm like, that was the opportunity for a competent, qualified, smart woman who has served America to become the first female president and break the barrier, and they rejected her. And is there something to, because I'm just curious as a man, is there something that women as well are gaining from this, what I'd call disinformation and sort of this propaganda to kind of keep them subordinated? Is there something they're gaining that I can't see?
I do. I think there is. And I think there's a feeling of comfort, because that is the role women have always played throughout all time in every culture in the world, that there is comfort from, quote unquote, knowing one's place. And it did make sense in centuries past when men were off either chasing mastodons or they were at war, that the woman would, secure the home front and raise the children. Now, society has changed greatly. It's no longer necessary. And I think there is comfort for a lot of women, to take on that traditional role. That's certainly their choice. But I think when they see women who are politically ambitious and successful, maybe there's a deep-rooted jealousy. Maybe there's frustration that they didn't take that path, and it might not even rise to the conscious level, but it then takes a misogynistic form where they criticize these women. Now, there is also the issue of policy, where I imagine a lot of women just didn't like, Hillary's policies on immigration or taxation or whatever, and that's perfectly fine. My book does not get into policy. And one thing I wrestled with while writing it is the question of, how do I know when something is really misogyny, or it's just that the individual who happens to suffer from chronic no penis syndrome, is really not a good candidate, or the policies are bad. So what I came up with is, if you replace, imagine her as a man, would they say the same thing about him? And then that makes the misogyny question really clear. I came up with a list of statements that were from the recent 2 elections in the US. Imagine someone saying, he should be a lot more modest. He does not have the right body type for television. Men who are sweet, cheery, and non-confrontational will be more successful. Or my favorite one of all is, he got his high position in the bed of a powerful woman. I mean, none of these things make sense, right? When you reverse the gender. So that really was helpful to me in a great way.
Wow. When you reverse the role, I mean, just, it doesn't compare. We do view them differently, the genders.
Imagine if Donald Trump was a woman named Donna Trump, right? And she was overweight. She had an orange face. She had a fantastically cantilevered yellow hairdo. She was always boasting that only she could solve all the problems of the country. She had grabbed men's private parts and boasted about it. She had been married 3 times and unfaithful to all 3. And do you think that Donna Trump would have won? I think clearly no.
I hope not. No. I think they would call her a laughing stock.
Right. And yet
this person is abrasive, horribly obnoxious,
boastful, ambitious, like all of that, right? And her hips are too big, and her face isn't right, but they don't do it to men.
No, that's the mystery. And really what we're talking about here are these kind of invisible enemies that hold women back. And so I guess I wanted to take it back to 2 people you talked about in your book, who I had studied actually quite a bit. There's Hatshepsut of ancient Egypt, and then Jezebel, right, of ancient Mesopotamia, I believe. And what was interesting about, I'd love you to tell the story, but Jezebel she tried to escape the monotheistic society of the Yahweh God, and she believed there was more people you could believe in, and she was thrown out of a window and executed and killed by dogs. Versus Hatshepsut did the same. She played the ideological card. She had a divine connection to her father, the king, and because of that, they propelled her to the throne. So would you say religion has held women back as well, or is religion just a non-category factor when it comes to this overcoming misogyny?
Oh, no, religion certainly has kept women in their place. Let's just look at Genesis in the Bible, okay? God created Adam and Eve. He put them in this paradise garden. He said, don't eat this particular fruit. Eve talks to the serpent, thinks maybe they should eat it. She tells Adam, let's eat this fruit. He says, okay. And they both get blasted and sent out of the garden. And God puts an angel with a flaming sword to prevent them from ever getting back in. So, the early Christian church and through until fairly recently, at least into the 19th century, blamed all women for Eve's sin of disobedience. Now, since we're blaming all women for Eve's disobedience, why don't we blame all men for being clueless idiots? Because he knew he wasn't supposed to eat the fruit. And he said, okay, like he's just dumb, right?
Mhm.
So it's all, there's a theme of blame the women. I mean, it started in probably well before Genesis, but Genesis is one of the earliest texts where it's really clear. So yeah, religion and just about everything else has been set up to keep women in their place, which is making dinner for men, raising men's children, keeping men's house. Nothing wrong with that, but some women want to do something else. Why not let them?
Correct. So that is the exact point that people throughout history have said that no, they actually don't want it. It's against their best interests. And then society, the feminists they're misleading women. So I'm just fascinated that, because there was a Hitler 1934 speech that he gave to the National Socialist Women's League where he said the best of times for Germany were when men need not fear being ousted from their position by women, and at the same time women had no need for this quote unquote emancipation, which was an idea from the Jewish intellectuals. So so there's always this, there's men telling women that, hey, you actually don't want to be a CEO. You don't want this.
Right. So when my father got out of college in 1950, he went to the top newspaper in Baltimore, and he got a job as an editor. Now, I guess it was between him and two other white male Christian guys, right? It wasn't hard. And these days, it is more difficult if you're, a white guy, because there are women, there are people of color, right? There's so much more competition, and I think that a lot of the sexism and God knows racism in this country that we're seeing is a result of white men feeling, really threatened that they're losing their position. But if you take a step back from that and you just look at the overall economic good of the country, keeping 50% of the people locked up, keeping them home, perhaps brilliant scientists and doctors, and you'll never realize that talent. You'll never realize the economic profitability that can come from it. So I don't think it's a good idea overall to keep us home cooking and cleaning.
No, horrible for the country. And just like you were saying, I think you touched on something here, that this is predominantly a white male fear. They call it white fright. And if we look at, even more women nowadays are attending university than men for the first time ever. And I do believe that a lot of this misogyny today comes down to fear of economic security, that your job is going to be taken by a woman, but because she's qualified, not because she's a woman, because she has more qualifications. So this encourage, instead of, and like you said, the religion, Genesis, they blame the women, but the men should be blamed as well for being weak. Like you were weak. And not even, and it's time for you to accept this world that we're in right now should include women and minorities, because we are all human beings. So the white male hegemony is crumbling, but that's not a bad thing. That was a established hierarchy that needs to be dissolved.
Right. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, you mentioned at the start of the show, just all of the social upheaval, that's going on. And I think that we may be hearing the bellowing of a gravely wounded dinosaur, right? He's ruled the earth for uncontested for tens of thousands of years, and he suddenly understands the possibility of his own extinction. He's not going to rule the earth anymore, and he's raging against the dying of the light. I think that is what we're seeing right now.
I love that. Yes, I specifically remember that line from the book. And one other thing from Off With Her Head, you mentioned a very brief statistic, but I was fascinated by it. And you said that from 1915 to 1930, the word, quote, bitch was used more than double in America. And now that was right, coinciding with the First World War, the economic problems, the Great Depression, which led into the Second World War. And so I'm seeing this cyclical relationship between women's rights, and at the same time, this is when they were granted suffrage in America. So there's this cyclical nature of when women get more rights, then the pushback comes, then the economy tanks, and they blame women for taking jobs in minorities. So where do you think we sit today, currently, in not just our political climate, but here in America as a society? Are we at the apex of this push through for women, or is it going to get worse and this culture war is going to continue?
I think the culture war is going to continue. It's just so deeply ingrained in all of us. You know, when you look at racism in this country, racism in the world, really, it goes back maybe 500 years. It was used to justify the enslavement of Africans. If you said they were stupid and they were late, you know, all of that, then you could justify doing that to these human beings.
Yeah.
Misogyny, as far as I can tell, goes back to the cave. You know, it's going to be real hard to dig that out of us, out of every book, every movie, you know, so it's going to continue. And we have made great progress. We can vote, we can be CEO. It's still hard. We're not well represented in the Fortune 1000 companies or in politics, but it's a slow and steady climb despite the culture wars. I think it will continue.
I agree. And like you were saying with the Fortune 500, I know it is a record-breaking amount of women who are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and it is a whopping 41 out of 500. So only
right. Well,
8%.
So, you know, it used to be 0, so it's not too bad. But I wanted to just talk for a moment, if I can, about you know, the ways to take women down, to keep them in their place. So as you've seen in my book, I came up with something I call the misogynist handbook. It's unwritten rules that have been used for thousands of years, you know, to take down powerful women. And one of them is to call her sexually depraved. She's a whore, she's a nympho, she's a slut. You mentioned Jezebel in the Bible. And, you know, Jezebel is the byword for a slutty woman, right? She's known as the slut of Samaria. And it was because of a few verses in Kings where this guy was coming to kill her. He had just killed her son, the king. So she was clearly an older woman. And she looks out the window, she puts on eye makeup and does her hair. And then they end up throwing her out the window and killing her. But because she put on her eye makeup and did her hair, the story has come down to us that she was trying to seduce this guy, the new king, right? And the fact is, she was most likely getting ready to die like a queen. She wanted her murderer to know exactly who he was killing. But for thousands of years, you know, Jezebel means a slutty woman. She may have been in her 60s, right? And she knew he had just murdered her son. It's not likely she was going to try to have sex with this guy to save her life. So there are stories like this throughout history that I found that are, you know, just pretty shocking. So we talked about ambition. Women shouldn't have any. Men are praised for it. I have one chapter called Why Doesn't She Do Something About Her Hair, which looks at all the ways women are criticized for their appearances that men are not. Women have dangerous and unruly female hormones, right? So they can't be trusted. Their voices are shrill and annoying. They're mysteriously unlikable. They're witches, they're bitches. In some cases, they're murderers, you know, and in other cases, it's literally off with her head. You know, women have died as a result of sexism.
And like you're saying, there's no for some reason there's no physical judgment that we place onto male leaders. I don't know why it is. Yes, if he's fat, if he's loud, if he's ugly, I don't care. As long as he has power.
Right. And the voices too. Hillary Clinton was so criticized for her voice, which I mean, it seems fine to me, but, you know, listen to Bernie Sanders, right? Listen to Donald Trump ranting and raving. I mean, they're not pleasant voices, but I have never heard either one of them criticized for their voice. And Hillary has been raked over the coals. She actually went to to voice training, and she was even criticized on MSNBC. I mean, please.
I know. The mainstream media is the worst. I don't watch.
Even the most liberal media is criticizing women candidates at times.
they can't help it. I think if they have to play to the audience and try to give them the red meat in those big articles about her pantsuit, or it's just I'm just amazed that in even voting for presidents, it's like the things we think about are not qualifications. It's about personality. It's about looks and how we feel about them at the end of the day, which is absurd qualifications to put on someone to be the head of the most powerful country in the world.
Well, it really is. And the interesting thing is a recent study came out by the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, which is an organization it's non-partisan. So it helps women, both Republicans and Democrats, to gain political office. And they found that women have to be really likable to get elected. And that's a tightrope, right? I mean, they have to show certain strength, but not too much, because then they're unfeminine, right?
Yeah.
They have to show a certain amount of femininity, but not too much, because then they'll be seen as weak. Whereas male candidates do not need to be likable. As a matter of fact, many people who voted for Donald Trump didn't like him, but they liked his policy on a strong border, or on taxation, or the economy. So that's another disconnect. Why can't women be unlikable, but yet strong leaders who might have the policy positions voters want?
Even someone like Margaret Thatcher, right? They called the Iron Lady. Like they portray him to be like almost men.
Yes,
and that's what you taught. I thought that was interesting in your book. How yes, they have to walk the tightest rope. You can't be over ambitious. You can't be weak. You have to be a mother at home, but you also can't be only at home, because then how are you going to work for the country or the company? Right. So, and so let me ask, as a woman, are there, these are the, like, is there a training for women to succeed in a man's world? Or what is the advice that you give to someone who looks at where we are right now and saying, how am I ever supposed to succeed in this world? Even as a man, I find it hard, but as a woman,
I think it's hardest for women running for political office. Yes, it can be difficult in the business world, but when you're running for office, you're in the mainstream media, you're all over social media. You have to deal with criticisms that you wouldn't if you were just trying to be vice president of a bank, right? And there are training programs for women candidates, what to say, what to not say, how to dress, how to deal with all the sexist comments flung at them. There is training in particular for them to put up with the vicious nature and the threats on social media, so that they know what they're getting into. A lot of women just quit because they their family is threatened, their children are threatened, they just can't deal with it anymore. So candidates have to be really tough this day and age.
And let me add to that, the other side, the anti-feminists, they want you to quit. They want you to quit, and then they can tell you, see, women aren't supposed to be, they can't take the attacks, they can't handle the pressure, men are more thick-skinned, and it just reinforces this unfortunate belief that women are not cut out to hold these powerful positions in politics. And
yes, that's true. They want us to quit because, and I don't know if this reaches the level of conscious thought. It could be just something that's subconscious and then sort of manifests without them knowing it. But I think that they don't want the competition. They want to be like my dad in 1953, white men waiting for an interview to see which one is going to get the job, rather than thousands of people, male and female, and maybe transgender and Black and white and Hispanic, so it's, I think it was a nicer world for them when it was 1950. And when you hear the political slogans, take us back again, I think that's what they want, right? They want, they want the wife in the kitchen making a lovely dinner, making a lovely house for them, and they don't want people of color to compete with them either.
No, because they again, it comes back to that sort of their manlyhood is being threatened, their economic power. And again, I think it's great to have historical perspective that you offer in your book that is sometimes neglected. It shows, it just, again, like I said in the beginning, it showed me, like, just reminded me, boy, we've come a far way. of course, from back in those days, but we are still like, I just can't believe that we're still having to have these conversations about, gender equality at the end of the day. Like there's still people. And by the way, let me ask this: is there an ideal, like, if on the could this work on the flip side, if a female candidate were to run and say, I'm against abortion, let's build the wall, and they took on the Donald Trump personality, but they were a female, would that have the same effect? I mean, it's
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think those who like Trump could get behind that to a certain extent, and yet there would probably be a lot of male MAGA supporters who wouldn't.
right.
I think it would be difficult, and I think, I think the reason Joe Biden won in 2020 was because he was a white male. I think if the
Yeah,
nominee had been a woman or a person of color, I think Trump would have won that election, even if they had the exact same, policies and plans as Biden had.
I agree. And it kind of, it brings me back. This was an interesting big pop culture thing where the Elizabeth Holmes story came out. And what was interesting is she had changed her voice, changed her, she adapted the deep voice, kind of like a man, and she succeeded heavily. Now it was a very nefarious company, and it was like medical fraud, but it was interesting to just see that a woman who took on this sort of like male aggressive, what we consider male and aggressive, and it worked. And so what does that say about our society, that we reward these abrasive, aggressive males who just like to squash people and will engage in like, fraudulent activity, and it can turn out some good financial profit for you?
Right, right. Well, usually when women become aggressive, either in politics or the workplace, they are harshly criticized for, I mean, not even aggressive, let's just say assertive.
Yeah.
They're called, a bitch, a witch. Whereas men are often praised for being, good businessmen or tough politicians. So I think she's a unique case in some respects.
You talked about witch there, because I remember that in your book, you talk about how that is a common word slurred at women, calling them a witch. Is there some religious sentiment behind that, or why does that imagery maybe so powerful? And even going back to like the Medusa, how does that play into the plight of women?
I traced it back thousands of years to our earliest history where, men do have greater physical strength, clearly, and they would go out and hunt. And the women were the ones who would, coax the fruits and vegetables out of the earth, right, and make the food, and they were the only ones who could bring life forth from their bodies. For all of the physical strength, men cannot do that. So women were always seen in the world's most ancient cultures that we know of as being magic. And the earliest statues that go back 30,000 years are of women with enormous hips. Some of them seem to be, giving birth. The earliest temples are, clearly fertility temples. And at a certain point, men turn that biology into weakness, and so like women are prone to mood swings from menstruation and pregnancy and menopause, and what happens to them once a month is foul and disgusting slime, and I trace the whole story of that. But I do think that the witchcraft story goes back to our ability to bring forth life, and it's still with us. Whenever a woman tosses her hat in the ring for a political office, within hours you see the memes of her on a broom with a green face, long nose with a wart on it, and a black pointy hat flying around. And that never happens with a man. I mean, ask yourself, what is the male equivalent of witch? Warlock? That's just sort of a lame thing, right?
There is.
Even the Bible, I believe it was the book of Exodus, says, thou shalt not suffer a sorceress to live, or a witch. So it doesn't say warlock or sorcerer, it's a feminine ending, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's always been this fear that we have, witchy magic powers that men don't have. And if that had been true, you think we would have gotten somewhere higher, faster, long ago.
Right. I clearly, and then, one point you just brought up are the witch. It's about the kind of their sexual power as well. And I get this is a kind of a free for all discussion, but I see it going around because right now there is a repudiation of cancel culture, which in my mind, or not in my mind, what cancel culture is that predatorial men are being ousted from their jobs for sexually abusing women. This is something that should be celebrated. But then there are also social scientists there's Michael Mann. He has his 4 sources of power. There's ideological, economic, military, political. And I had a professor at UCLA. Her name was Kara Cooney. I'll cite her because she was great. And she said there is a source of sexual power that women can and should wield in society. And I thought about it, I'm like, they actually, if you're in a man's world, you should do whatever it takes to try to make it, because that's what men do to make it, right? So would you say something like the use of sexual power is a real thing? And if so, is it okay for women to use their, I know that's kind of a crazy question, but that's legitimate? We're fair play here.
So my first book was called Sex with Kings. Came out in, I don't know, 2004, perhaps. And it looked at the lives of Europe's royal mistresses. So hundreds of years ago, if you were an intelligent and ambitious woman, you were not allowed to attend university. You were not allowed to run for parliament. The only way you could really wield power is by sleeping with the smelly old king, right? And then you get castles and diamond necklaces and all of this. And I think at the time, that's perfectly understandable. These women did what they had to do to get to where they wanted to go. I think this day and age, when we do have a good semblance of equality in many cases, you know, a woman can get her doctorate in political science. She can run for office. She can become anything. It is probably going to be a bit harder than it is with men. I don't really think that, you know, I think a woman using sex for position is no longer needed and should be discouraged. Then the woman walks right into the old slut archetype. You know, she's a Jezebel. You know, so I don't really think that's a good idea these days. No.
Right. I agree. I guess I was just fascinated thinking about from that point of view of like, wow, what do you have to pull off some sort of miracle to be successful in a man's world. And like, there's just but it's a bad tool, but it's interesting. Like just the cancel culture and even the Amber Heard trial. It was, I don't know. I'm seeing just a constant warfare against women about sex, about them using their sexuality, and including, you know, the abortion has been overturned at the federal level. And I'm like, there are forces out there who are ruthlessly trying to stifle women's sexual freedom. And so,
well, if you want to see the intent of a thing, look at the result. Because sometimes it can be chaotic with all of these conversations swirling around our heads. So the result of Dobbs is going to be that thousands and thousands more American women are not going to be able to go to college. And they're not going to be able to go into the career path that they want and compete with men. They're going to be home with children. And I think that's going to be the result. And I think that's, I'm sure many people are concerned about babies and all of that. But I think overall, the message is to put women in their place.
Wow. I'd be honest, I did not even think about that from that perspective of them being forced to stay home with perhaps their rapist's baby, right? They have
or a severely deformed baby who under normal circumstances, they would have, you know, terminated the pregnancy. You know, a lot of children require round the clock care. You know, the mother may choose to not proceed with that, you know, her whole life would pretty much be over at that point, but now she has no choice. So she won't be there with the 3 white guys, you know, applying for a job. She'll be home taking care of the handicapped child. Yeah.
And it's by design, and it's like, so there it is. So there is a constant pushback to try to put women back in their domestic quote unquote roles that we as men have assigned to them.
You know, it was a much more comfortable life for men. I get that.
Yep.
if you watch Leave It to Beaver and the father comes home and there's the wife in a big hoop skirt and an apron, cooking dinner, and the house looks lovely and the children have done their, I mean, yeah, it must have been a great life for the white guys back then. We're in a different world now, and we need to realize that. They can cry cancel culture all they want. It's a buzzword when you take a moment to really look at it.
Right.
Things have been canceled going back thousands of years when they no longer work for a particular society. We canceled slavery in 1865. Was
Yes.
that a bad thing? There are a lot of things that should be canceled.
Correct. And it's important to stay loud and like you said, to tie this back to the beginning, to shame these people who try to say cancel culture is bad, to shame them for trying to take us back to the traditional nuclear American families, because if we stay silent, they win, because they are aggressive in their agenda to put it back in their place.
We need to be just as loud. Yeah, our voices need to be heard over all of that cacophony of cancel culture and let's go back to 1850 or whatever it is they want to do.
And they would be happy to go off with her head, I believe, if they could codify it into law. So
yeah, maybe that's next after Dobbs. You never know.
Yeah, executions in the well, only if you stay loud and you keep writing these books. This is important. We need to learn the history of how we got here and how we can overcome this moment, hopefully once and for all, or at least stay in power to silence those other voices.
I think it's not a bad thing that there's a variety of voices out there. There always has been. They're louder because of social media. And, the way things always used to be is that there were all of these opinions, and some of them were extreme outliers. And then we'd we'd end up agreeing on something in the middle. And that it's not really that anymore. It's like there's barely a middle. It's just two extreme sides. So I do hope that once these upheavals die down, we can just sort of go. I mean, I've always been a moderate. I've considered myself middle of the road. Somebody in this country shifted the road so far to the right. I'm where I've always been, but I find myself in left field. And it's, I'd sort of like to, if we're going to take it back, I'd like to take it back to the politics of, 30, 40 years ago, where we can all sort of agree on basic issues.
I agree. Yeah, it's definitely, I'm a middleman myself, and I don't like I'm very fed, as much as I'm involved politically, I'm so fed up with it's exhausting, and it's killed that's what's really killing our culture and our ability to communicate with those who share different opinions. It's impossible today.
And the nastiness and the threats of violence. We never used to have that. Of course, we never had social media, but people are just behaving so very badly. We can disagree on inflation and taxation and the borders and a host of things, but we don't need to threaten to skin each other alive and hang each other and shoot each other. We don't need to do that.
No, and I'm really quickly about this social media, because from as a historian, do you think social media, because I believe social media it's very dangerous and bad, that it can amplify bad voices, but at the same time it can now give women and likewise other good men, right, it can give good voices the chance to override and send a good message. Technology like that, would you say that's progress for women?
Yes, it's like that old saying, a knife could be used to kill, or in a surgeon's hands to heal. So social media is this neutral thing, and people put stuff on it, negative, positive, whatever. So yes, for all of the negativity that is out there and will probably continue to be out there for some time to come, we can put a different spin on it. We can fight it. We can write positive things about what these women are doing and what we want for our country. We can shame the shamers who are threatening these women and their families. It can be used pretty much for everything. And I just think that people of goodwill need to be louder. We have a tendency to just not want to deal with, vicious memes and posts, and we're going to need to step up and deal with that.
Yeah, we're going to need to get tough. Well, Eleanor, thank you so much for coming on. I am now a fierce protector. We will never let them go off with her head ever again. We will not return to the dark ages.
Thank you so much, Dash. I really enjoyed talking with you.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the show. Help spread the word about uncovering the truth by giving us a 5-star review and sharing the show with a friend. We're available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you for listening, and as always, I will continue to uncover the truth. The Uncovering the Truth theme song was created and produced by Pokari.